Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Tokyo Police Club, titled Forcefield. Now, you know what? It's been a little bit of a while since I've talked about Canadian music. So let's change that, shall we? Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Canadian rock scene, indie or otherwise. The fun fact is that once you move away from the post-grunge scene with acts like 3 Days Grace and Nickelback towards more of the pop indie rock vibe, there really are some really high quality bands that you wouldn't expect. For one, I'm a big fan of Marianas Trench and their intricate pop opera brand of songwriting. To say nothing of great hooks, solid melodies, and at least 2 incredibly solid albums. On the other hand, you've got an act like Metric, who I also really like. Oddly, for a lot of the same reasons and more of an indie vibe. Great hooks, solid melody lines, reasonably good songwriting, and at least 2 albums I really like. And you know what? I think at the intersection of these two bands, I would place Tokyo Police Club, a band that might call themselves indie rock, but really does share a lot of traits with most pop rock acts. While they might have a bit of a rougher sound, a little bit more of an independent vibe, their lyrics are decidedly lodged in the overly verbose, almost naive landscape of emo pop rock that got popular in the mid-2000s. And while I wouldn't say they're as strong songwriters or musicians as either Metric or Marianas Trench, Tokyo Police Club, for me, are the definition of a good rock band. Not a great one, but a very solid good one. Good hooks, decent vocals, occasionally interesting lyrics, and a strong pop sensibility both in theme and in execution. And it's really that pop sensibility that's defined the band for me, as there's been a progression towards more of an indie pop level of polish and lightweight energy that has given them really more staying power than anyone would have expected given their earlier years. And thus, I was interested enough in their newest album, Forcefield, which early buzz was suggesting was geared towards more of a mainstream pop audience, especially with the success of the charts of indie rock. So, what did I find? Well, I'll say this. Tokyo Police Club's Forcefield is an album that really only gets more frustrating the more you think about it, because on the surface, this record is very much in the vein of typical Tokyo Police Club. Upbeat, guitar-driven pop rock with a hint of an indie edge and lyrics that straddle the line between naive earnestness and, reality. But the second you take a step deeper and really start to analyze the lyrics, a real gulf opens up between the themes that this album is approaching and their execution. And while I don't think this cripples the album by any stretch, it does make Forcefield a fair bit more interesting than I was expecting, making it a decidedly flawed, yet, at least for me, still a very enjoyable record. So, okay, how does this happen? Well, a comment was made by the band saying that they wanted to avoid some of the more recent trends in indie pop rock and stick with the riff-based approach they know, or perhaps go even a little bit further in that direction. And honestly, that 1 points for me right out of the gate, because you're not gonna find a stronger detractor of the reverb-swollen, unnecessarily ponderous glut of indie pop rock than me. And while there are a few moments where the reverb is a little bit thicker in the production than I'd prefer, Tokyo Police Club deliver on that promise, seemingly by going into a time capsule circa 2010, because their sound really hasn't evolved much since their last major record 4 years ago, other than another shift towards general pop radio friendliness. But you know what? Then again, that's not all entirely their fault. Just because mainstream radio jumped on board with modern indie rock doesn't mean that Tokyo Police Club should have changed to avoid that radio airplay. The one change I will note, outside of some loose island-inspired rhythms that for me were a little bit hit and miss, is that someone finally introduced this band to some minor chords, and they take advantage of it to write some decidedly darker songs when it comes to instrumental tone. And as much as the occasional cutesy and naive nature of Tokyo Police Club's instrumentation, it can get a little tiresome, songs like Gonna Be Ready and Tunnel Vision are a little bit jarring. Part of this is lead vocalist David Monks. He's a good singer, and his delivery tends to fit well with the more upbeat and surface level happy songs, but the darker tracks, I don't know, they're a little bit of an awkward fit, as I'm not sure if Monks is the most convincing stage presence behind some of these tracks. Now granted, if you look past the surface level on the lyrics, you end up unearthing some real surprising darkness and melancholy to this album, which is where we need to talk about lyrics and themes. The album's title, Forcefield, it's not lying, because this record is exploring the invisible barriers that we erect between ourselves and other people. And honestly, I really liked a lot of what Tokyo Police Club did with this concept. The opening 8-minute epic, Argentina for instance, it explores how a guy tries to and fails to hit on a girl in question, and then he realizes that she was never going to stick around and was deflecting his advances not because she didn't like his company, but because she didn't want to hurt his feelings. So in other words, he apologized for being such a straightforward asshole. You know what? That's a pretty satisfying emotional arc, and while Tokyo Police Club does get a little bit cute with the Evita references and the lyrics, you know what, I'll argue it kind of works. And then there's Toy Guns, which completely embraces the band's naivete, which it's its own sort of force field in a way, and ignores potential danger just to be happy and spread that happiness to others, tearing down people's barriers in the face of danger. Yeah, it's cheesy completely, to be sure, but you know what, I thought it worked. And I really like Through the Wire, a song about holding on to love despite distance, even though that song does have a rather distressing similarity to Haim's fantastic song about wire last year. Now, the album Closer, I Feel the Effect, it tries for something similar to Through the Wire, but except they frame it between exes, but it does muddy the water a little bit with stories of friends who are just oblivious to the messages that they need to hear, which you really could have held over an entire song on its own. I really think they should have split up those particular concepts into two distinct songs. But it's where the songs get a little bit more dark and complex that things do get more interesting. Miserable, for instance, is a bizarrely upbeat song about how everything is going so right for the narrator and he's so blissfully oblivious that he only peripherally picks up on the fact that his friend might be in pain. And yet, the narrator in question isn't really truly happy and he's just putting up a happy facade. And then you have songs like Tunnel Vision and Gonna Be Ready, which are more straightforward as they both seem defiantly determined to party or be the alpha dog and pick up chicks regardless, which the instrumentation does match that harsher tone, but both songs do feel myopic, either through alcohol, societal expectations, or sheer dogged determination to completely avoid, reality. But it is these songs that really start to raise the question for me of this album. How self-aware is Tokyo Police Club regarding the barriers that they're talking about in their songs? Because on the one hand, the more blissfully naive material tends to resonate a little bit stronger thanks to Monk's delivery and the more upbeat tone and the more honest delivery. But on the other hand, the most oblivious track on the album is Hot Tonight, the second track, which approaches obnoxious self-absorption and with its really basic composition is easily the worst track on this album. But if there is greater self-awareness about said barriers that are being erected or torn down in the various situations that they describe, Monk's earnest delivery, it's not a great fit for that particular thesis, and really the album never reaches a coherent thesis about these emotional barriers that they're creating, other than some weak self-justification, and honestly, that feels really kind of hollow to me. Furthermore, that level of self-awareness does kind of undercut some of the more sincere material that you wouldn't see otherwise, and I'm not sure that Tokyo Police Club has a strong enough handle on the tone or are good enough technical songwriters and go for that nuance to really play it both ways, and that's just my opinion. You know what? The funny thing is that despite my issues with this album, I did like it a fair bit. Tokyo Police Club at this point remind me a fair bit of post-Green album Weezer, for better or for worse. It's a comparison that a lot of critics are making, and not without good reason. And as with Rivers Cuomo, it's hard to tell how much of this is a self-aware mask. So, as much as I like this album, and let me stress, I did like it, I'm very much aware that between concept and execution, it's a bit of a mess. But you know what? It's a mess that's compelling, well performed, and honestly really kind of enjoyable. So I'm giving this album a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. Sure, at this point, Tokyo Police Club are making radio-friendly pop rock that would easily fit onto Canadian radio, with only the faintest hint of an indie touch, but honestly, this album has bigger ambitions and is definitely worth a few listens. So you should all check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out that you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark. I'll see you next time.